What if I told you that even ordinary people can be on top of the world?
The first attempt on the North Pole by a team of women gets underway today.
The epic adventure will take them over 1,000 kilometres of hazardous sea ice.
It's thousands of miles of ice and nobody.
And so I found myself walking into this water and then sinking up to my neck.
I honestly thought I was going to die in the Arctic.
The all-new 30 for 30 podcast. Subscribe now on the ESPN app or Apple Podcasts.
30 for 30 podcast is presented by Mini. We're finding the best sports stories for you right now. And to do that, we're behind the wheel of the new Mini Countryman, the biggest Mini yet.
Please proceed to the highlighted route.
To find great sports stories, you have to get out into the world and follow your instincts. That's where the new Mini Countryman's all-wheel drive comes in handy. With all four, we can chase down a story in the city, the country, and most places in between. No matter what story you're chasing, the new Mini Countryman will help you find it. It's available now, and so are 30 for 30 podcasts.
This is the Stephen A. Smith Show podcast.
I'm Stephen A. Happy Labor Day to one and all. Stephen A. off, Dan Graca filling in today. And you know what? We're glad to be here because I don't know if 2 hours is enough time to get us through everything we have to cross off the list on this Labor Day. Hope you're having a good one, enjoying the holiday, resting, relaxing wherever you might be. As is, I guess, the last official day of summer, right? I guess tomorrow everybody goes back to work or to school or whatnot, and you begin to turn the page. And if you do what we do, right, in the business of sports, this is actually a great day because we spent how many months, those long summer months, where all we did was talk about college football, the NFL, previewing, prognosticating, what is this team going to be like? What's that team going to be like? Can this team make a charge? Who's going to be disappointing? Who's going to maybe exceed expectations a little bit? Well, you know what? We've turned the corner. We see the light now at the end of the tunnel, and I think it's just great. 100% fantastic. I don't know about you. I couldn't get enough of the college football this weekend. And not just this weekend. It started Thursday night. So Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. We got another game tonight. So 5 days to whet your football appetite if you are a fan. And you don't have to worry about preseason football anymore. That unwatchable product that the NFL puts forward and shoves down our throat for way longer than they have to. And thankfully, in just 3 days' time, we have a real football game. Coming up on Thursday night, the kickoff up there in Foxborough. The Chiefs and the Patriots will cut the ribbon on the 2017 NFL season. We'll get to all the NFL stuff coming up in just a little bit. And I understand when you talk about college football, there are sections of this great country of ours that are a little bit more swept up in the college football craze than others are. I get it. Where I sit right now in the great city of New York, New York is a professional sports hotbed. When you have as many teams as New York does in the various sports, that has to be expected. So maybe college athletics isn't exactly out or near the top of the list when it comes to the New York sports fan. But this year, in college football, people in New York are going to be paying attention. Why? Well, because you have one of the two professional football teams. They wear green. I don't have to spell it out for you. They need some help. They need a lot of help. And as a matter of fact, at the most important position in the sport, if not the most important position in professional sports, they don't have a long-term answer. At least we don't think so. All right, the Christian Hackenberg experiment looks like it's come and gone. Bryce Petty, for whatever reason, the Jets just don't want to give a fair crack at winning the job. For whatever the reason, even though he's shown certainly more aptitude than Christian Hackenberg at this point in time. Josh McCown is 38 years old. He's a placeholder, nothing more, nothing less. He's a veteran, right? He's the Obi-Wan Kenobi for whatever young quarterback is going to fill that meeting room out there at Florham Park or the practice field, however you want to slice it. But you have a few guys in college football who are getting more talk than the rest. Josh Allen at Wyoming, Sam Darnold, Southern Cal, Josh Rosen at UCLA. Those are the guys coming into the season that most fans already had at the top of their list, saying those guys could be potential number one overall picks in the draft coming up next spring. So if you are a football fan in New York, maybe you kept a little bit more watchful of an eye on those three guys this weekend. And hopefully you had a chance to sit in front of the TV last night, because you probably got to see not only the most exciting performance of the weekend, and then when you throw in the fact that, oh, by the way, it just happens to be one of those three names that we were talking about, pull off a virtual miracle on the opening game of his college football team's season, that makes it even the more spectacular. And what Josh Rosen did last night, bringing UCLA back from 44-10 down in the third quarter. No, I didn't misspeak there. 44-10 down in the third quarter against Texas A&M, and we'll get to them in a second, and Coach Kevin Sumlin. That just makes you go wow even further. And I'm sure the Jet fans were probably watching that game last night, and while Rosen was throwing touchdown pass after touchdown pass and rallying the troops, they're envisioning not a guy who's wearing the gold and the blue uniform, but a guy who's wearing green and white. And a guy who's out on that field at MetLife Stadium and not doing damage carving up A&M at the Rose Bowl like he did on Sunday night. That's got to get you excited. But you still have a whole season to play. One game doesn't mean anything. It doesn't mean anything for UCLA. It doesn't mean anything for Josh Rosen. It doesn't mean anything for Texas A&M. And I know that if you're A&M, you can't lose that game last night. You can't. But some would say the beauty of college football, some say these are one of the things that they don't like about college football. But if you're Texas A&M and you lose that game last night, guess what? Your season's not over yet. It isn't. You know, back in the day in the BCS era, for the most part, okay, when you only had the two teams playing for the national championship, if you lost a game, 90% of the time, your season was over. There was no chance of you winning a national championship. Now, in the era of the college football playoff, where they opened the door and extended the invitation a little bit further to now where they give out 4 passes, you can lose a game, you can slip up, and you still have a chance to play for a national title. And that's a great thing. You want as many teams still in the mix, still in the race at the end of the season, because it gets more fans engaged. You know, it's like what's happening right now in baseball. Think about what the second wild card and what the second wild card has meant to teams certainly in the American League, where you have an extra 5-6 teams and fan bases who ordinarily would already be thinking about football and not worrying about baseball again until next season. They still have a race on their hands. They're still believing. But it still doesn't excuse the fact that Texas A&M lost a game last night that, in some cases, would get a coach fired. And Kevin Sumlin, who I like personally, okay, I've had the pleasure of interviewing him a couple of times. He's a gentleman, and I think he's a good football coach. But post Johnny Manziel, post Mike Evans at Texas A&M, the results have not exactly been what you expect them to be. As they've given him more money and tacked on more years to his contract, you're up 44-10 on the road. I don't care who you're playing. In the third quarter, you got to win that football game. Absolutely. And you can make all the excuses in the world how A&M lost their starting quarterback and had to go with the backup to close out that football game. I don't care. You're spotting them how many touchdown lead. You have to find a way to win that football game. And if you want to take umbrage with at least some X's and O's and the way A&M approached that game as they were trying to close it out, can you maybe run the football a little bit more? I mean, I couldn't believe how pass happy they were, even with a backup quarterback in. If that situation, and I know that sometimes you're going to get crucified for maybe being a little gun shy and being too conservative. But if that's me, and if it's my team, and I have a big lead like that, I'm keeping one eye on the clock. I'm taking the air out of the football, and I am running clock. I don't care if I have to run the ball 3 times right into the middle of my O-line. Let that clock bleed. I want to take 40 seconds off the clock on each of the first 3 downs in that possession. That's my goal. And hopefully, just hopefully, my defense makes a play. So I think that it also took some help from A&M for Josh Rosen to be able to orchestrate the heroics that he did in bringing UCLA back from the depths of where they were last night in that football game. And, oh, by the way, let me just throw one thing out there. Did anybody else catch this? Maybe it was just me. And I'm surprised that they didn't even bring it up on the broadcast with Gus Johnson and Joel Klatt, who ordinarily do a really good job, I think, on Fox. They call a good football game. We know that Gus gets a little excited at times. We know all that stuff. But for the most part, they give you an honest broadcast. But did anybody notice that on that game-winning touchdown, maybe, just maybe, the call shouldn't have stood? Did you see the way the receiver was bobbling the football? And if you want to go by the letter of the law, until you have complete control, 100% of the football, and I know in college, you only need 1 foot for it to be a completion. But you can make an argument that he didn't even have 1 foot down when he finally established possession of that football. And even more surprising is that they didn't even go back and review it. I don't even think they went and gave it a second look. If I'm A&M, I'm looking at that tape on the flight back from L.A., back to Texas, to College Station, and I'm saying, can we get a do-over? You know, if I'm Kevin Sumlin, can I throw the challenge flag from 30,000 feet up in the air? Can I get a do-over on that one? But that's a brutal loss. But as I said a couple of minutes ago, if you're A&M, the best part about last night is, number one, you flush it down the toilet. You forget about it, as if it never happened. The boosters aren't going to forget about it. Some of the Board of Trustees, Board of Regents, and A&M haven't forgotten about it. There was already an interesting Facebook post that was put out there last night from one of the board members who didn't exactly speak glowingly about the man in charge of the Aggies. You can check that out on your own. Maybe we'll read it a little bit later on in the program. But if you're A&M, you lose a non-conference game last night. You still have something to play for. You still have a season. Because in college football, the end-all, be-all, let's face it, is your conference record. That's going to dictate what you do with your season. So once A&M gets into the heart of conference play, if they go out there and they win the SEC, which most people are going to consider to be the best conference in all of college football, and they don't have a conference game now for a few more weeks, but if you go out there and have a good showing in SEC play, hey, it's almost like that UCLA game doesn't happen. Because do you really think, and maybe this is a question that should be asked in December and not here in the first few days of September, but do you really think the College Football Playoff Committee is going to leave out the champion of the Southeastern Conference when you're talking about giving 4 spots for a college football playoff? Not me. But if you're a Jet fan, you got excited what you saw last night. Oh, you got excited. You loved what you saw from Josh Rosen. You were envisioning him in green and white. You were envisioning him going up and down the field, not against A&M, but against the Patriots and Bill Belichick's defense, and Brady on the sidelines pacing like he can't do anything about it. Oh, you just hoped that one day he could be yours. But let's keep it all in perspective. Yeah, it was fun, absolutely. But Josh Rosen, you know what? He set the bar pretty high with just one game. Now how does he live up to this for the rest of the season? That's the tricky part, right? How do you establish that consistency? Because on the other hand, you have Sam Darnold, who most people consider to be the number 1 pick in the upcoming NFL draft, even though still we're months away. His Southern Cal team, yeah, they got a win. Yeah, it wasn't pretty. They didn't blow out Western Michigan. Remember, Western Michigan was a big program last year under P.J. Fleck, who since left to go to Minnesota. But you expect Southern Cal to do a little bit more damage than they did, and Darnold didn't even play that great. Didn't throw a touchdown pass. Threw a couple of interceptions. But you know what you like about Darnold? He kept his poise. He kept his poise. And that's one of the things that scouts love about him more than anything else, is that the guy never gets rattled. And believe me, if you're going to enter a situation like the Jets figure to be after this year, in the media market that is New York City with a rabid fan base, you better not be rattled. You better keep your poise. But there's room for improvement. Because you know what? You and I could be sitting here this time next week talking about a role reversal, right? Talking instead about Darnold being the sexy name again, and Josh Rosen maybe slipping to that number 2. Because USC is going to get themselves a pretty good test coming up on Saturday night. They're taking on Stanford. Stanford's a good football team. If Darnold goes out there and can beat the Cardinal and puts up a top-notch performance, then it is going to be back to Sam talk 24/7 if you're a New York Jet fan. We'll do more college football throughout the show. Brad Edwards ESPN College Football Insider, will join us coming up at the bottom of the hour. We'll go around what was a wild week one of the college football season with him. But on the pro side, it's game week. Finally. We don't have to worry about preseason games. We don't have to worry about training camp. We don't have to worry about which quarterbacks are getting reps in practice versus the other. Okay? That all goes out the window. It's game week. Jets, Bills, Giants, Cowboys. I can't wait. You can't wait. We'll get it going with you here. 866-SAY-ESPN. 866-729-3776. Also paying attention to the Yankees. Big game coming up this afternoon as they begin a 9-game road trip, which could go a long way towards determining where they're going to shake out for the month of October. Got to get through it. It begins 1st at 3 this afternoon in Baltimore against an Orioles team, which is playing red hot. Manny Machado swinging a red hot bat. He was the American League Player of the month of August. Jordan Montgomery and company going to have their hands full this afternoon. There's word on Gary Sanchez's suspension, which we got to get to as well. Busy program. We're with you for the next couple of hours. We'll keep you company here on this Labor Day. Dan Graca filling in for Stephen A. here on ESPN Radio.
Want to be a part of the show? Hit Stephen A. up weekdays from 1 to 3 Eastern at 866-729-3776.
You're listening to Love Advice with Leanne. Caller, you're on the air.
Hi, Leanne. Longtime listener, first-time caller. Why, in your professional opinion, do you never take my calls off the air?
Is this Carl?
Yep, it's Carl. I mean, we had a few dates. Everything was great. I thought,
Well, you know, when you switch to Geico, you could save a lot of money on car insurance.
Okay, awesome.
You should call them.
I will.
Geico, because saving 15% or more on car insurance is always a great answer.
You're listening to the Stephen A. Smith Show podcast.
Stephen A. off, Dan Graca in on this Labor Day 2017. 866-ESPN, 866-729-3776. You can tweet at me at Dan Graca, Graca. We'll be joined by Brad Edwards, ESPN College Football Insider, coming up at the bottom of the hour and talk about a weekend that was on the college gridiron. Unfortunately, you know, I mentioned a couple of moments ago how if you lose a game here in the opening weekend, that you still have life, you still have hope, you can still make the playoff. But there's losing a game and then losing one of your key players in the process. And that's what happened, unfortunately, to Florida State on Saturday night in the much ballyhooed showdown against Alabama because, you know, not just were the Noles outclassed by Nick Saban and company, which, look, join the club, right? That happens to a lot of teams. And, you know, that was bottom line. That was a dogfight. That's what that football game was. And, you know, who would have thought that special teams would be the key for that football game? When you talked about Bama blocking that kick at the end of the first half, and then they come back with a block punt, a fumble recovery on the kickoff return. I mean, 11 points off of turnovers just on those two instances there on special teams. I mean, and you play defense the way that Bama does, you know, that's going to go a long way towards ensuring that you get a victory. And then, you know, to make matters worse for FSU, you have DeAndre Francois get injured late in that football game, and as soon as it happened, you knew that it wasn't good. You know, when you saw the replay and you saw his leg get rolled up, and when he was down on the ground, and they had to help him off the field, and he couldn't put any weight on it, and their worst fears became reality, and that DeAndre Francois is going to have surgery and he's going to be out for the rest of the season. So if you're Florida State, you're a team that had designs on making it to the college football playoff. Now you're going to have to go the rest of the way without your quarterback. You're going to play pretty much a freshman in James Blackman, who's going to get the first crack at holding that job down. And unless he turns out to be a revelation, which, you know, remains to be seen, Florida State went from a team who was a presumptive college football playoff participant, or at least contender, to now you're looking at a team that probably isn't even considered the favorite to win the ACC anymore, and probably the momentum shifts back over to a team like Clemson, who I know that it was just one game and what they did against Kent State, but Kelly Bryant looked pretty impressive, at least in his first time out. He's not going to be Deshaun Watson, but Clemson, you have to feel good about, is now being a team to be the leaders in the clubhouse in the ACC and to get one of those 4 spots in the college football playoff. But that's why you got to play the games. And what we talk about after week 1, there's going to be a different conversation around week 8, week 9, and that's why you have to let the season play out the way it is. So a lot of work still to do, and like I said, we'll get into all these things with Brad Edwards coming up in the bottom of the hour here when we talk some college football. As far as the locals go with the NFL, Jets are in Buffalo this weekend. Jets are only, I say only, an 8.5-point underdog. I still think that's a little bit high, to be honest with you. I mean, are the Buffalo Bills right now in a position to be 8.5-point favorites over anybody? Anybody? And the fact that there's still this uncertainty involving Tyrod Taylor. Tyrod Taylor, who earlier this morning was still said to be in concussion protocol by Sean McDermott, the head coach. And remember, this is a guy who suffered that hit a couple of preseason games ago. So we're going on almost 2 weeks, and he still has not been pronounced ready to go. Now, he was out on the practice field today. He took part in individual drills, but he didn't do any team activity, and he still hasn't been given a green light and been pronounced fit. So there is still some of that uncertainty. And when it comes to the concussion stuff and the head injuries, it's a little bit dicey. You can't sit here and say, oh, yeah, he should be good in a couple of days, because you don't know how the body's going to respond to a concussion. But should he not go, you're talking about Nathan Peterman, okay, who is a rookie quarterback, who was taken in the middle rounds this year. You mean to tell me that as bleak and maybe uninspiring the Jets' outfit looks going into this season, that if they had to go up to Buffalo on Sunday and take on Nathan Peterman and the Buffalo Bills, a kid making his first ever start in the National Football League opening day, you mean to tell me that the Jets can't win that game? Or at least can't put forth an effort to where they're going to be in that football game for 60 minutes? Of course they can. And I think they got a shot even with Tyrod Taylor back there quarterbacking. And Tyrod Taylor, look, over the last couple of years, I've become somewhat of a fan of. All right, I think he's played above or beyond a lot of people's expectations, including mine. But this is a winnable game for the Jets. And if you look at the early part of their schedule, not getting crazy. Believe me, I'm not trying to be one of those guys. I'm not trying to go there. But if you look at their first 5 games, at Buffalo, at Oakland, all right, that on paper looks to be a tough one. Home for Miami, who's still trying to work things out with a brand new signal caller. Home against the Jaguars, who, depending on who you want to believe, the Jaguars are basically the Jets South, with how many problems that Tom Coughlin and company have down there. And then they go to Cleveland to take on the Browns for Week 5. You mean to tell me that there's not at least a few winnable games in that first handful? You're darn right there are. So all this talk about 0-16, all this talk about tanking, and them finishing with the worst record in the National Football League, that's why you play the games. And there could be a totally different conversation about this Jets team come Week 4, Week 5 than what we've had all summer. You know, what happens if they get out of the gates 3-2? Do you then start to get a little greedy and say, hey, let's try to win some games? Or, oh, no, should we go lose because we're supposed to have the number 1 pick in the draft? That's why you can't think in those terms, and that's why I scoffed at that all summer long. Whenever you hear about tanking and losing and we want the number 1 pick, these guys don't care about that. Every guy in a Jet uniform that is going to go out on that field on Sundays during the football season, their objective is to win. Some of them aren't even going to be on the team next year. So you really think that they care what the Jets are going to do in the draft next April? They could care less. Their objective is to go out and win on that Sunday. Same thing with the coaching staff. Some of them might not be here next year. They want to win that game. All this talk about losing is nonsense. Now, you know what? They're probably not going to make the playoffs. They'll probably finish with a losing record. But they're not going 0-16. All right, you heard it here first. They will not go 0-16. Not in this NFL, even the way their roster is presently constituted. They will win some football games. Brad Edwards, college football insider, joins me coming up. It's Dan Grassa in for Stephen A. on ESPN Radio.
Guess what? You're in the middle of the Stephen A. Smith Show podcast.
Damn it, I mean it! Dan Grassa filling in for Stephen A. here on ESPN Radio on this Labor Day. 866-ESPN, the telephone number, 866-729-3776. First college football weekend almost in the books. Got a game tonight, of course, with Georgia Tech and Tennessee. Brad Edwards, ESPN college football insider, nice enough to join me here on the program. And Brad, first of all, thanks for hopping on the show. Let's start right with last night. Do you consider that more a great comeback by UCLA or more a epic collapse by A&M?
That is a great question. I guess you could go either way. I would probably side toward epic collapse by A&M, needing to point out that anytime a team gets down by 34 and doesn't quit, that's not easy to do, even if the other team's helping you. So you got to give credit to UCLA, of course. But when you run the ball as well as A&M did in the first half, and then you just can't do it anymore in the second half, and forget that UCLA was able to come alive offensively, score those points. My question is, if you're A&M, given what you did for the first 30 minutes, how do you not score a touchdown in the second half?
Yeah.
Even one ends the game. And I realize they lost their quarterback, but he was not a big part of what they were doing offensively in the first half anyway. To me, there's just no excuse for failing to run the ball in the second half and get the ball in the end zone.
Brad, you're preaching to the choir. I said it earlier in the show. I mean, at that situation, I know you don't like to get conservative, and, then they would have said, well, why, if they would have done that, you would have said, well, why did they get conservative? And that cost them the game. But in that situation, when you have a sizable lead like they did, you have to play the clock game in that situation and take the air out of the football.
Yeah, and look, to your point, like if they had just thrown all over them in the first half, and then, the laws of conservatism say, okay, let's stop throwing and run some clock in the second half, it would make more sense. But all they had to do in the second half is keep doing what they were doing in the first half. And if they had done it 1/3 as well, they would have won the game easily.
The Josh Rosen dynamic certainly takes off after that performance last night, not only because he was presumed to be one of the higher picks in this upcoming draft, maybe the possible top pick in the draft, given, if the Jets, who are quarterback needy, get that first pick. So people in New York certainly were on board with the Rosen bandwagon after that one. But if you look back at his season last year, Brett, it was injury-laden. He really didn't get a chance to really do all that much. Do you think even playing like he did last night almost increases expectations for him almost to an unfair level, given what he's still trying to come back from last year?
Yeah, I guess it could if you are looking at it from more of an uneducated standpoint, and, you're just looking at the yardage. I mean, he obviously got away with one huge throw there in the second half that should have been picked off and ended up being a touchdown, and the game's over if that ball is intercepted. So you have to look at that too. I mean, it was a really good effort, but I don't know that it was the greatest game that he ever played, even though statistically it might suggest that. So, look, I think that there are a lot of things that he's going to have to do better than he did last night, and his offensive line is going to have to protect him better, certainly better than they did in the first half, and his defense is going to have to play more like they did in the second half, or this is going to end up being a 6-6 type UCLA team, if not. And no matter how well the quarterback plays in that situation, it still doesn't look good when you're a starting quarterback and your team's losing games.
I agree. Brad Edwards, College Football Insider, ESPN, joining us here on the program. And on the flip side, unfortunately, you look at a guy like Kevin Sumlin, who the heat's been on now for a few years, Brett. And not to say that A&M's season is completely ruined. I mean, they could still make something of this. It was a non-conference loss for them. But I'll tell you right now, Sumlin looks very much so like he could be the 2017 version of what Les Miles was at LSU last year.
Yeah, it wouldn't shock me if there's a quick hook with someone this year. I was really wondering, like, what was the point of bringing him back? Because he lost a lot from last year's team, and I don't know why anyone would have looked at what A&M had coming back this year and said to themselves, "Oh, this team could go, 9-3, 10-2." To me, that was never in the cards. I saw them before the season started, and by the way, I expected them to lose to UCLA before the season started, so that much didn't change. But I saw them as a 7-5, maybe 6-6 type team, and I felt like he was going to have to do a lot better than that. He was going to have to overachieve in order to keep his job. And I think the big question for A&M, this is what they have to decide. Do they judge where the bar is for that program based on what their history has been, or do they put the bar based on what their resources are? Because Texas A&M, they have all the pieces that you need to be a great football program.
For sure.
I mean, even in the SEC West, they still have all the things that you need. They've got more than Auburn does. They have more than, I think you could even argue, a place like Georgia does, just because of what they have just in that state from a recruiting standpoint and all the financial resources from the alumni and all that. There's no excuse for A&M to not be a perennial top 20 program.
And
really outside of that first season with Johnny Manziel, and that was all Manziel.
Right.
They have not been that under Kevin Sumlin.
No, definitely not. And, I mean, throw in the fact that Kyle Field, on a good day, when the team is going good, that's as difficult, potentially, a home field advantage as you have in all of college football.
It should be. But since they joined the SEC and since they expanded that stadium, it has not been at all.
Brad Edwards, our guest here, ESPN College Football Insider. Now, one loss doesn't kill your season, but unfortunately, if you're a team like Florida State with the lofty expectations, not only do you lose opening week, you lose your quarterback, and you don't really have a viable option waiting in the wings. That DeAndre Francois injury is really, really crippling, no pun intended, for Jimbo Fisher and company, and probably, Brad, shifts the focus in the ACC from Florida State probably over to Clemson, right?
Yeah, I don't think there's any question that a lot of people would be switching sides today. I was on the Clemson bandwagon before the season started. That's who I picked to win the ACC. So it doesn't change much for me, except for the obvious, which is that Florida State doesn't seem like as big of a threat now as they did before. The reason I liked Clemson is just simply because Clemson, which has its own questions at quarterback at the moment, doesn't have to play Florida State until almost mid-November. And that gives them a chance to kind of get that position settled. Now you can say the same thing for FSU, which is that they, of course, not a position they wanted to be in, but at least before the Clemson game comes along, they've got a chance to get some experience there and get some chemistry with the receivers. The problem for FSU is they've already lost once. In terms of the college football playoff prospects, you don't need to take another loss between now and Clemson if you want to stay in that playoff race, and their schedule's not easy. Starting with Miami next week, they've got some challenging opponents between now and Clemson, and I think it's going to be really tough for them to keep the ship afloat.
There were some questions, Brad, about Alabama and the fact that Nick Saban lost so many key players on defense to the National Football League in the first couple of rounds of the draft, no less. I mean, we're talking some major players here. You know, how long would it take the new guys to kind of get their feet wet and to contribute? Well, they look pretty good to me on Saturday night. Throw in some plays that they made on special teams, forcing turnovers. Bama's still Bama.
Yeah, they looked great defensively. I mean, when you take the entire game, even some of the plays that Florida State made in the passing game were really close to being defended. There were a couple that were really close to being intercepted that weren't. So considering all the inexperience they had out there, I thought it was an outstanding effort. The issue for Alabama moving forward is that they lost two guys who were in that rotation in the front seven, two linebackers, to injury, out for the season. I mean, obviously the Francois thing got all the headlines, but Alabama lost a couple of guys who made some big plays in that game. And so when you consider that those guys were already replacing some of those, first couple day picks from the NFL draft from last year, now depth becomes an issue. And I know they're loaded with 4- and 5-star guys, but during this run that Nick Saban has had, if there's one thing that you might be able to say in terms of maybe poking a little bit of a hole in what he's accomplished, is that while, like everyone else, he's had a few guys that he's lost to injury along the way over the course of those years, but he has not yet had one of those seasons where you just get more than your fair share of injuries. A lot of teams have that, and Alabama has not had one of those seasons yet. This was a really bad start for them on that front, and they still have plenty left to get the job done unless they take more injuries on that side of the ball, and then it'll start to become a concern.
Brad, a little unfair maybe to put so many expectations on the lap of Tom Herman in Texas from the outset. I mean, they were outclassed on Saturday afternoon. Maryland goes in there, puts up 51. They were bad on defense, bad on special teams. Maybe a little too much too soon for them?
I think we would all acknowledge that there's only so much you can expect of a coach in his first season period, but especially his first game, because you're coming in and most of the time you're putting in a scheme that's different on each side of the ball from what they were previously doing, and sometimes with players who weren't necessarily recruited to that scheme, that those aren't their strengths, what you want to do. That said, a lot of people last year when Charlie Strong was fighting for his job were of the opinion that if he held on, he was going to have a really good team this year just because Texas had so many guys coming back. So it's not because Texas doesn't have enough guys who've played before. They had a lot of experience on both sides of the ball, and they still do. And so you wonder, was it just simply a scheme thing where guys were confused and that's why they weren't making plays? But just from a talent and experience standpoint, there doesn't seem to be any excuse for what happened to them on Saturday.
First weekend gave us a lot of excitement. Certainly going to get only better here on out. Brad Edwards, College Football Insider, ESPN. Thanks for a couple of minutes. Happy Labor Day, Brad.
Thanks, Dan.
Appreciate it. We come back. What is the latest on Odell Beckham? Is he practicing? Will he be out there at Jerry World on Sunday night when the Giants open the season against the Cowboys? We'll talk Big Blue. It's Dan Graca in for Stephen A. on ESPN Radio.
Give Stephen A. piece of your mind.
He is sorry.
Call him weekdays from 1 till 3 Eastern.
I mean, just trash.
At 866-729-3776.
Enjoying this podcast? Then you should check out all of ESPN Film's newly released 30 for 30 podcasts. From the producers of our award-winning documentary series, this is an amazing collection of sports stories you need to hear to believe. Speaking of amazing, Delta Airlines and the Fly Delta app make your travel experience amazingly easy with real-time bag tracking, e-boarding, and passport scanning during check-in. And don't forget to download 30 for 30 podcasts to fill your flight with stories that will keep you coming back for more.
Guess what? You're in the middle of the Stephen A. Smith Show podcast.
Damn it, I mean it!
And Graca holding it down for Stephen A. on ESPN Radio. 866-ESPN, the telephone number, 866-729-3776. We'll get into all the NFL matters coming up here in hour number 2, but just to finish up on Texas A&M and Kevin Sumlin, I mentioned that not long after that one went final last night, you had a member of the Texas A&M Board of Regents post something on social media about his displeasure over the coaching situation with the Aggies. And naturally, when you cough up a lead as sizable as the one that Texas A&M did last night, you're going to have some people that are going to be very critical. This is Tony Busby. He puts his name behind it, so he doesn't hide from anything. It wasn't one of these anonymous posts or anything like that. But this is Tony Busby who said, "I'm sure I may be criticized for this post, but I honestly don't care. I've been on the Board of Regents for the A&M system for almost 7 years. During that time, I've not once commented on Kevin Sumlin and his performance during his tenure at our school. I've never said a word when he and his agent manipulated a much bigger and longer contract. I said nothing about his arrogance and his mishandling of multiple player controversies. I said nothing when we had multiple awesome recruiting classes, only to see key players leave our school or underperform. But tonight I'm very disappointed, and I have to say this. Kevin Sumlin was out-coached tonight, which isn't new. He recruits well, but can't coach the big games or the close games. Our players were better tonight. Our players were more talented tonight. But our coaches were dominated on national TV yet again. I'm only one vote on the Board of Regents, but when the time comes, my vote will be that Kevin Sumlin needs to go. In my view, he should go now. We owe it to our school and our players. We can do better. Share this as you see fit." That's Tony Busby, Board of Regents for Texas A&M. Being a little bit harsh, being a little bit unfair. Hey, bottom line is the next few weeks are going to go a long way towards determining his fate. And I brought it up when we had Brad Edwards on just now. You know, remember, LSU's season last year didn't exactly start off all that great. And when you coach at places like LSU and ultimately Les Miles had to face the fire, and a place like Texas A&M as well, where, you know, they pump a lot of money into that program. The facilities, as we talked about, they recruit fairly well. They pay the coach a lot of money. They expect you to win. And when you lose games like that, and when you lose games that probably you already should have had in the bank a long time earlier, that's why you have the criticism. So we'll see if he can get up off the mat. And it's not just about beating the out-of-conference patsies they have on the schedule the next couple of weeks. Let's see what happens once SEC play starts, when they take on Arkansas and then South Carolina and then Alabama. 1, 2, 3, the gauntlet there in SEC play for the Aggies. As I said, we'll switch gears and we'll do some NFL coming up. Week 1 is finally here. It has finally arrived. We have a real game on Thursday night. Jets and Giants in action Sunday. We'll get into all of it. Dan Graca in for Stephen A. on ESPN Radio.
That's just a sample of what you'll hear on the Stephen A. Smith Show. Weekdays at 1 p.m. Eastern on Sirius XM Channel 80 and the ESPN app.
What if I told you some stories you need to hear to believe?
Everywhere you went, Dan and Dave, Dan and Dave.
And that's these two athletes that are going to go to the Olympics this year, and it's going to be settled in Barcelona.
When Reebok approached Dave and I The first thing both of us said, neither one of us are on this team yet.
The thought never, ever crossed my mind that Dan nor Dave would not make that Olympic team.
The all-new 30 for 30 podcast. Subscribe now on the ESPN app or Apple Podcasts.
30 for 30 podcast is presented by Mini. We're finding the best sports stories for you right now. And to do that, we're behind the wheel of the new Mini Countryman, the biggest Mini yet.
Please proceed to the highlighted route.
To find great sports stories, you have to get out into the world and follow your instincts. That's where the new Mini Countryman's all-wheel drive comes in handy. With all four, we can chase down a story in the city, the country, and most places in between. No matter what story you're chasing, the new Mini Countryman will help you find it. It's available now, and so are 30 for 30 podcasts.
This is the Stephen A. Smith Show podcast.
I'm Stephen A.
Hour number 2 on this Labor Day. It's a Monday. Dan Graca in for Stephen A. Another hour here on ESPN Radio. 866-ESPN is the telephone number. 866-729-3776. You want to be part of the program, or you can tweet away at Dan Graca, Graca. Lot on the agenda for this Monday. We did a lot of college football in that first hour. As far as the NFL goes, I can't tell you how excited I am. I really can't. Because I don't know if you're like me, I've just grown less and less tolerant of the preseason as I've aged, as I've matured, as I've wised up, whatever you want to say, okay? But preseason football, I really cannot pay it any attention. I can't. I want every team to be able to get through the month of August as much in one piece as is humanly possible. I don't want to see injuries. I don't want to see anything that's going to take away from watching good competitive football when it really matters starting this week. And I cannot wait for these games. I really can't. Thursday, I'm going to be like a kid on Christmas morning with the Patriots, with the Chiefs, up there at Gillette Stadium. I cannot wait, and it can't come soon enough. But if you're a New York football fan, you have contrasting agendas. You're a Jet fan. We talked about it a little bit in hour number 1. You kind of just want to get to the end of the season and then begin to think, all right, what's the future going to be like? Who's our coach going to be? Who's our quarterback going to be? What guys that were on the roster this year will be part of the solution moving forward? Which guys are just going to basically be guys who are passing through here en route to bigger and better someplace else in the National Football League? But you shouldn't tank. You shouldn't just go out there and say we're going to lose games because that's what we're supposed to do. Of course not. All right, I outlined it for you. First 5 games on the Jets' schedule, they are not daunting. They can win a couple of those football games. And I know a fan who has the number 1 pick in sight maybe will not necessarily want them to go out there and be successful, but you should want your team to win games, at least at the start of the season. Okay, everybody's 0-0. Everybody has a shot of doing some good things. You try to win games. You root for your team to win games at the beginning of the season. I'm not buying this tanking stuff. If you want to tell me that when you get to week 16, week 17, and you're already mathematically eliminated, and you might say to yourself, boy, what does winning a game really do for us, big picture? When it could potentially cost us 2 or 3 spots in the draft, then I will hear what you have to say. Then I can meet you halfway. But to start out, you can't root against your team to win. You want them to have success. I don't know of any football fan, a Jet fan, that's going to be sitting there on Sunday afternoon when the season hasn't even started yet and you're rooting against them up there in Buffalo. You root for your team to win games. Whether they will or not is a different story. Will Josh McCown actually make it through one whole game? That's a different story. Remember, last time he was an opening day starting quarterback a couple of years ago with the Cleveland Browns, which was against the Jets, he couldn't even make it through the first half before he got hurt. And then Johnny Manziel had to come in and rescue the Browns, and they nearly pulled off the upset that day in Todd Bowles' first game as the head coach of the Jets. But I digress. All right, the Buffalo Bills are a beatable team. Tyrod Taylor's status is uncertain right now. You're a Jet fan. You root for them to go up there and win the football game. Giants, on the other hand, you're playing for a lot more. Not only do they have a shot, they got a really good shot. Let's face it. I think if you're a Giant fan, you are disappointed if that team is not in contention for one of the big prizes in the NFC. All right, I picked the Giants to win the NFC East. I think that they will outclass the Cowboys, and the Cowboys have a lot going on. More on them in a minute. But I think this Giant team, if they stay healthy, they have what it takes to be the best team in the NFC East. Now, do they have enough to get to a Super Bowl? I can't rule it out. But if you put a gun to my head, do I think they are getting to the Super Bowl? Probably not. Because I think there's some other teams in the NFC which are also pretty darn good and might be a little better, at least on the surface, than the Giants are. Okay, Green Bay is a good football team. The team that was in the Super Bowl last year and by all accounts could have very easily won the game. The Atlanta Falcons are a good football team. I'm really looking forward to seeing what this Seattle Seahawks team can do out west. And with the acquisition of one Sheldon Richardson that they picked up on Friday, that's going to make that defense even more daunting. I think Sheldon Richardson's going to have a monster season, by the way, for the Seattle Seahawks. No more of this stand-up outside linebacker playing out of position. Sheldon Richardson's going to Seattle. Number one, he's playing for a contract, so he's going to be on his best behavior. That's one. Number two, he's going to be back in his normal position. Pete Carroll's going to tell him, Sheldon, put your hand in the dirt, get there on the defensive line, and go wreak havoc in the opposing backfield, like we're used to seeing Sheldon Richardson do when he was playing at his best for the New York Jets. So to say the Giants are a Super Bowl team, that might be a little much. But they could still have a good season. I'm expecting them to have a good season. And it all starts Sunday night in Dallas, a game you want to win. Now, last year, remember, Giants swept the Cowboys both games during the regular season. Dallas still won the division championship. So it's not the end-all, be-all, but do you want to win the game? Of course you do. It's a division opponent. It almost counts for double. You know the old saying. You want to get this one. Will Ezekiel Elliott be in the backfield for the Cowboys? That's another story that we don't have an answer to. Okay? You're not going to get any news today from Harold Henderson or the powers that be with the NFL with the appeal. Nothing's coming down today, but there is that deadline of tomorrow. 4 p.m., I believe it is, that if you don't hear a verdict one way or the other, then Ezekiel Elliott's playing on Sunday night. If they didn't come to a decision, Zeke is running out of that tunnel with a uniform on against the New York Giants. I got a feeling he's still playing. Not because they're going to delay the decision, but he and his team are going to go through the same hoops that Tom Brady and company did for Deflategate. And Brady, while he was engulfed in all the appeals and whatnot, he still got to play. And they fought it out in the courts for weeks and months and years, and that's the bottom line. I'd be surprised if Zeke Elliott's not playing for the Dallas Cowboys. Now, does that make them unbeatable? Of course not. All right, the Giants could very easily beat this Dallas Cowboys team, and not only that, have a better season than them. But the Giants have a little bit of a tricky start to their season. Okay, not only do they go to Dallas on Sunday, then they come home to play a Lions team in the home opener on Monday Night Football. Lions are a good football team. I don't want to call them a sleeping giant, no pun intended, but, hey, made the playoffs last year. They just gave Matthew Stafford a boatload of money. All right? They're going to surprise some people. Lions could, if all things break right, be in that 9 to 10 win range again. That's not a layup. Then they go down the turnpike to take on Philadelphia and the Eagles, which is never an easy trip. Remember, Giants lost there last year on that Thursday night game late in the season around Christmas when Eli made a couple of mistakes there late in the game, right? That's not an easy trip. Then they go to Tampa. Buccaneers are a playoff team this year, if you ask me. Not an easy game. Then it's the Chargers back home. Chargers, to me, surprise team in the AFC. Been saying it all summer. And then they go to Denver to take on a Bronco team in Week 6 where it's never an easy place to play up there with the altitude. So and then the Seahawks back home for Week 7. Giants do not, I repeat, do not have an easy first half to their season here in 2017. They really don't. And in a worst-case scenario, I mean, if you're a Giant fan and you go through those first 7 games, would you really complain if I told you they were 4-3? I think you would take that. And then you try to hack away at the second half of your schedule, which also has some tricky spots as well, including trips to Oakland to take on the Raiders, to Arizona to play the Cardinals. Giants don't have an easy schedule this year. And that comes with the territory when you have a good season like they did a year ago, right? You expect them to be challenged, and that's what the Giants have in front of them for 2017. What about Odell Beckham? Is he going to be out there playing for them on Sunday? Didn't practice today, but from the moment he went down, in that preseason game in Cleveland. And with all the drama and the theatrics in the tunnel of him down on his knees and he couldn't bear the pain, and it was just convenient that the camera was right there on him, right? I mean, he knew exactly what he was doing. Odell's a showman, right? Odell's a showman. He knows how to play to the camera well. Good for him. I said it then, and I'm not changing my tune. He's playing week 1. You know, when you heard all this talk about, oh, well, he might miss 2 weeks. Oh, no, he's playing week 1. All right, he was in the locker room last week dancing. He will be out there on the field wearing the uniform at Jerry World to take on the Cowboys on Sunday night. And you know what? If you're Odell Beckham, you got to deliver. You need to go out there and have yourself an Odell Beckham-type season for this Giant football team. And you should be motivated by the sting of what happened last year in January at Lambeau Field in that playoff game against the Packers, where he, along with a lot of other Giants, played a horrible football game. But you know what? When you're going to have the target on your back like Odell Beckham, and you want all the accolades, and you want all the glory, and you want all the commercials, and you want all the money, and all the attention, and all of the above, you have to deliver. So, yeah, if you do drop a pass, if you do let one go through the breadbasket in the end zone, you're going to hear about it. It's not just, one mistake, especially in the big games like that. Especially in the playoffs, where you are going to be judged greater than any other game you're going to play, especially in a case like Odell, when he hasn't won a playoff game before as a member of the New York Giants. And that's one of the things that I've been critical of him since he's come into this league, is that Odell's kind of walked into this Giants organization, and he makes it sound as if a couple of those Super Bowl trophies that are in the lobby, right when you walk in through the front door there, Odell was responsible for. You know, Odell thinks, oh, yeah, I was there when they beat the Patriots in Super Bowl 42, and they were both Super Bowls against the Patriots. Oh, yeah, I was there. I was the one who caught the Eli pass, not David Tyree. That was me. But guess again, he hasn't won anything. And last year in his lone playoff game, he was atrocious. Absolutely atrocious. But he'll play this week. And I think if you're a Giant fan, you can't wait for the regular season to start. Much like every other football fan, because you don't want to watch preseason anymore. But, you know, this Giants offense didn't exactly wow, did they, during the preseason? And I know that you take it with a grain of salt, what you deduce from your team during the exhibition season, because it means next to nothing. And you had guys in and out of the lineup, but offensive line, that was going to be a legit concern for this Giants football team one way or the other, and it still very much is. See, this offense has some nice potential. They have more weapons in the passing game now with Brandon Marshall, with Evan Ingram, all right? Guys that can actually go out there and do some damage. But if the offensive line is not going to allow Eli to stay upright, to be able to survey the field and to go through his progressions and to find these guys and deliver the ball to make plays, then it's all for naught. It really is. I don't expect them to be a dynamic running team. But you know what? You don't have to be in the NFL anymore. You don't. It's a passing league. Giants have a 2-time Super Bowl MVP quarterback. I know he's getting up there in years. He'll be fine. Defensively, scary to think that they might be even better than they were last year. But something's got to give. Because if the Giants are going to take that step, that next step, and go from a 10-win team to a team that's going to win a division and maybe compete to get to a Super Bowl, either the offense has to get better, the defense has to get even better, or some combination of the two. Because last year wasn't good enough. Expectations for the Giants. Let's hear them. 866-SAY-ESPN. 866-729-3776. Plus, you already have some big injuries at some key positions already impacting the NFL landscape for Week 1, which we'll talk about as well. It's Dan Grassa in for Stephen A. Till the top of the hour on ESPN Radio.
Catch the Stephen A. Smith Show live on 98.7 ESPN New York, ESPN LA 710, and Sirius XM Channel 80.
You just can't make this stuff up.
Weekdays from 1 till 3 Eastern.
You're listening to Love Advice with Leanne. Caller, you're on the air.
Hi, Leanne. Longtime listener, first-time caller. Why, in your professional opinion, do you never take my calls off the air?
Is this Carl?
Yep, it's Carl. I mean, we had a few dates. Everything was great. I thought,
Well, you know, when you switch to Geico, you could save a lot of money on car insurance.
Okay, awesome.
You should call them.
I will.
Geico, because saving 15% or more on car insurance is always a great answer.
You're listening to the Stephen A. Smith Show podcast.
Dan Graca in for Stephen A. till the top of the hour right here on ESPN Radio. Phone number is 866-ESPN, 867-299-3776. At Dan Graca, you could tweet me there. Graca, the spelling. Yankees in an early hole in Baltimore. They're just underway, but Tim Beckham, who's been an absolutely fantastic pickup for the O's after acquiring him from the Tampa Bay Rays. I still don't know why Tampa Bay would want to trade him within the division, but that's their mistake, and Beckham just continues to make play after play after play with the bat, with the glove. Leadoff home run to the opposite field off of Jordan Montgomery, so 1-0 Orioles in the first inning down at Camden Yards. We'll keep you updated of any proceedings that are happening down at the ballpark. Let's get to some phone calls here. Well, we were going to get to some phone calls, but instead, you know, it's funny with the National Football League because I'm not a big fantasy guy. Don't play fantasy, never have, and really don't have any plans to do so. It's not something I worry about. But I'm in a couple of those knockout pools, the survivor pools. I think those are fun. And if you look at week 1 in the National Football League, if you were trying to wager a guess as to which direction to go, because when it comes to these pools, week 1, week 17 are clearly the most difficult and clearly the most challenging. Week 1 because you really don't know how good these teams are. I mean, we have an idea, but until they go out there and play games, that's when we get the true answer to what these teams are going to be about here for the upcoming season. And in week 17, you don't know really what the motivation are for some of these clubs, especially the ones that have playoff spots locked up. They might rest their starters and on and on and on. So this really is a very, very difficult week, and you could very easily get bounced if you're in one of these pools in week 1. And I was looking at the schedule here, and so far the big injury note that you have for the upcoming season, or for the upcoming week, is Andrew Luck is not going to play for the Indianapolis Colts. It had been rumored, but the club came out and made it official earlier this morning that Andrew Luck is not going to play as he still tries to work his way back from the shoulder surgery. So Scott Tolzien is going to start for the Colts on the road against the Rams out there at the Coliseum. Now, ordinarily, if Andrew Luck is going to miss a game, okay, because Andrew Luck is the heart, soul, the everything for that Colts franchise. So if we found out that Andrew Luck is not going to be playing, then you would think, all right, clearly the team that they're going to be going up against, that's the one that you would want to pick. But I keep asking myself this question, and I'll ask you this question. If you are in the predicament that I'm in, would you really sacrifice everything and risk it all on the Rams? You know, have the Rams done enough here to give you enough? You know, do you have confidence in Jared Goff, even against an Andrew Luck-less Indianapolis Colts team? Sean McVay, in his first game as a head coach, all 32 years old or whatever he is? Do you have enough faith in him? I don't know. It really scares me. I don't know if I can pull the trigger on that one. And you only have a couple of other avenues that you would really, I think, give serious consideration to. And I'll just say it. Despite what we think the Jets may or may not be for this upcoming season, I cannot, with good conscience, go ahead and say, I think Buffalo is the pick for week 1. I don't know if the Jets are winning that game. They might. How can I have confidence in the Buffalo Bills? They tore down that program. They brought in a new coaching staff. They brought in some new players. And it's not like Buffalo has won anything in the last 20 years. I mean, it's not like we're talking about some franchise that has their act together and normally goes out there and finds a way to put a good football team on the field year in and year out, because they don't. So it's not a slam dunk the Jets are going to be 0-1 after Sunday. Not touching that game. And if you look at the schedule, most of these games you can talk yourself out of getting involved in. Kansas City, New England, no part of that game. None. Jets, Buffalo, we went through it. Atlanta, Chicago. Now, that is one that you can maybe entertain me with. All right? The Falcons are the presumptive favorites in that football game. They easily could have won the Super Bowl last year. Chicago's still very much a fledgling team trying to find their way. They're going to start Mike Glennon. Mitch Trubisky's the future, but the Bears are a rebuilding bunch. Atlanta's supposed to go in there and win that football game. Maybe I'll think about them long and hard. Baltimore, Cincinnati, not touching it. Pittsburgh, Cleveland, all right. DeShone Kizer, the Browns. The Steelers. Le'Veon Bell signed his franchise tender today. Say no more. I think I'll probably give some good, long, hard thought to the Steelers. So that's another one. We're up to 2. Arizona, Detroit, not touching it. Jacksonville, Houston, aha. Now we have another one. Jacksonville is basically the Jets South with everything that we've read about them in the month of August. They got plenty of problems. Tom Coughlin coming out there and telling you, I'm not signing Colin Kaepernick, and I don't have to tell you why. Blake Bortles is the starting quarterback by default. They have a litany of issues. Houston, on the other hand, on paper, they're a good football team. They just have questions at quarterback. But with the area and everything that they've gone through, certainly they're going to want to come out and play good for them. I kind of like that game a little bit. So we're up to 3. Then you got Tampa Bay, Miami, no thank you. Oakland, Tennessee, no thank you. Philly, Washington, same thing. Indy, Rams, which we talked about. Seattle and Green Bay, not touching it. Carolina at San Francisco, not touching it. Giants, Dallas, not touching it. And then we have the 2 games on Monday night. Saints, Vikings, and Chargers, Broncos. Not touching either one of those. So when you go through the entire list of games here for week 1, I can only come up with probably 3 games that I think you would be in pretty good shape if you wanted to necessarily throw your support behind 1 or 2 or 3 of those teams if you're going to be in some sort of a survivor pool. But that's why week 1 is challenging, and that's what makes it fun, right? That's what makes it interesting. We have no idea how these teams are going to be. We can only wager an educated guess. 866-ESPN, the telephone number, 866-729-3776. I'd probably be the most confident in the Pittsburgh Steelers. Probably. If you had to have me pick one, I'm probably going the Steelers on the road in Cleveland. I saw something this morning. The Cleveland Browns, you thought the Jets had a rough situation with their quarterbacks? The Cleveland Browns have 4 quarterbacks on their roster. They're keeping 4, right? DeShone Kizer, Cody Kessler, Kevin Hogan, Josh Woodrum. 4 quarterbacks. The grand total of victories they have in the NFL as starters is 0. 0. 0 for 4. Yikes. Going to be another long year for that football team. Baseball. Mets. Yankees. The playoff landscape. When we return, Dan Graca in for Stephen A. on ESPN Radio.
Guess what? You're in the middle of the Stephen A. Smith Show podcast.
Damn it, I mean it!
Oh, yeah, Dan Graca in for Stephen A. on ESPN Radio. Weather could not be any better, at least here in New York. You know, this is like the last hurrah for summer, and the weather was just not that great. Saturday or Sunday, so you really couldn't do a lot of outdoor activities, and today's the best one of them all. Today's like a 10. Like, you couldn't script today any better. It's like not too hot. It's not cold at all. Sun is shining, not a cloud in the sky. It's one of those days. I was trying to check with the powers that be. I even checked with the man himself, Stephen A. I texted him, reached out to him before the show. I said, is there any chance we could do this show outdoors? Can we just pick up our stuff and maybe find some outlets and plug in and, like, do it out on the street? We won't bother anybody, you know, but it's just so you want to be outdoors. But soon enough, we'll be back out there. And if you're outdoors, enjoy it. And if not, we'll keep you company here for a little bit longer on ESPN Radio. You can tweet at me at Dan Graca, Graca, and, of course, 866-ESPN, 866-729-3776. Haven't done many phone calls today. Let's get to them. George in L.A. George, you're on ESPN Radio. How you doing?
Hey, good, man. How you doing?
Good, George. What's going on?
I want to get your take on the Aaron Donald situation, but before it begins, let me just start off by saying he is the most dominant player in the league, and he deserves his money. But do you think he's going about this the wrong way, like handicapping his team just to make some extra money? Like, he's probably going to miss this week, and who knows how it's going to impact him? Who knows how it's going to impact the Rams? You know, I feel like he's being completely selfish by handicapping the Rams into trying to pay for him. And then come next offseason, they're not going to be able to sign any of their other key free agents. To that, what do you say?
Well, let me ask you a question, okay? All right. First of all, I'll say this. Before I ask you a question, I agree with what you said. I believe that Aaron Donald is the best interior defensive lineman in the National Football League. Hands down. All right, I agree with you. And unfortunately for him, you know, he's played in relative obscurity so far in his 3 years in the NFL because first with the Rams in St. Louis and then out in L.A., he hasn't been on good football teams. But anybody that knows football and watches football could tell you Aaron Donald is legit. Okay, he's the real deal. So I agree with you. Now, he looks around and he sees what some of these other guys are making, and he feels I'm one of the best. Aaron Donald's one of the 10 best football players in the NFL, not just where he plays on the defensive line. He's one of the 10 best football players. So he wants to get paid. And now the other thing is this, George, all right? He is a guy who's already 3 years into the league. Most average careers in the National Football League are 3 years plus. Okay, that's the average. So he's already given 3 years of his body, 3 years of his livelihood. He wants to be able to cash in. Remember, the NFL, there's no such thing as a guaranteed contract. He wants to be compensated. I have no problem with the way that he's approaching this because I guarantee you one thing, George, is that if they come to an agreement in the next couple of days before the weekend, and Aaron Donald's going to be in uniform out there on Sunday against Scott Tolzien and those Colts, he is not going to miss a beat. You don't worry about that. If it was a rookie, like it was back in the old days when rookies actually held out before you had the wage scale, then I'd be concerned. But if Aaron Donald is under contract, he goes out there, that is one thing I am not worried about if I'm Sean McVay and the Rams.
Here's my thing. It's like, he deserves every single penny he wants. What I've been reading lately, I don't know if it's true or not, he wants an opt-out deal after 3 years, right? So he wants to front load all his money now, and then 3 years from now, after 3 years, he wants to opt out and do this all over again. My thing is, we have, I don't know the number off the top of my head, we have Trumaine Johnson's going to be a free agent next year, Alex Ogletree's going to be a free agent next year, Maurice Alexander. Those are three key guys on our defense.
Right.
And half our defensive starters are going to be free agents next year. My thing is, I'd rather pay the men than pay one man, you know? But at the end of the day, here's the thing. We went 4-12 with Aaron Donald on, all right? So if you think of, I'm not saying I'm not blaming Aaron Donald, no doubt. I'm just saying, like, how much of an impact, really, for example, in Houston, like, with J.J. Watt, the Texans still the number one defense. Like, Aaron Donald, as good as he is, he's not, like, it's not like a game, like, winning type of position, you know? It's just a position he plays. So the fact that he's trying to handicap the team for all this money, on his part, I think it's really selfish because he says he's all about winning, but he don't want to show up. And he's trying to handicap the team so he can't pay no one else.
Yeah, George, I disagree when you're going to call him selfish, though. And I thank you for the phone call, my friend, and good luck to your team coming up here this week. I can't call him selfish. And, guys, we've been through this so many times just over the last few years when you're talking about football players, right? It's a grind, right? What these guys have to put their bodies through each and every week, no other professional athletes have to absorb that type of punishment. None. So I'm all about these players now going out there and getting their money. You know, if you've earned it, get it. And, you know, if you want to talk about a contract and designing a deal where there is a potential opt-out after a couple of seasons, they're not going to call it opt-out like you have with some of these other contracts in other sports, like in baseball, for example. They don't really do that too much in the NFL. But what they do is, as George said, they front-load the money to where, you know what, it's a two-way street, that if the club wants to get out from the contract, which in Aaron Donald's case, you don't think that would be the case with the Rams, but if the club wants to get out from the player who maybe is underachieving and hasn't necessarily done his part to earn the money that's being paid, then the club can move on from that, and the salary cap hit is not going to be as prohibitive as you think it would be. But Aaron Donald is a guy that I want on my football team. All right, if Aaron Donald is cut loose by the Rams, which is never going to happen, but if he's out there on the street, 31 other teams be lining up for his services. You know, you bring up a team like the Texans, you brought up J.J. Watt. Yeah, they have J.J. Watt, but they also have some other really, really good players on that defense. You know, Jadeveon Clowney, Whitney Merciless, on and on. And they got some players. That's why, as a unit, they're such a formidable defense. All right, they're really, really good. A couple of guys in the secondary who are legit. So the problem is with the Rams, they're not as deep as a team like Houston is on that side of the football. But you need them on your team. You know, a really, really good three-technique defensive tackle. You know, the guy who did it as good as anybody, if you want to go back to Warren Sapp and what he did for those Tampa Bay Buccaneers defenses, with Monty Kiffin leading the charge and all those other guys they had back there, right? I mean, this could be a special, special group. However, now you're going to have a little bit of a different scheme because Wade Phillips is coming in there, and he's going to bring in his 34. So maybe Aaron Donald's role shifts a little bit on that D-line, but I still can't imagine him being any less effective. It's just different vocabulary. It's just different assignments, but the principles are still the same. All right? He might have to two-gap a little bit more, but I think he's up for it. Do the sack numbers come down ever so slightly? It could. It could. You know, in the 3-4 defense, most of your big sack numbers are going to come from your stand-up outside linebackers, for the most part. All right? When it's drawn up perfectly, that's what it would entail. But the Rams are a tricky team to me. They really are. You know, I've heard some good things about Jared Goff so far here in training camp and in the preseason, that he and Sean McVay are speaking that same language and they're on the same page. And you just hope that what Sean McVay did for Kirk Cousins the last couple of years in D.C. with the Redskins, that he can rub off onto Jared Goff. Because, hey, Aaron Donald's a great player. They're going to go as far as Jared Goff takes him. Bottom line, you need the quarterback who you took number one. You traded up for. You wanted this guy. And he was awful last year. Absolutely downright abysmal. They need that guy to perform. But in the NFC West right now, I mean, if I'm looking at the Rams, what are they going to be? No better than third, right? Seattle, I think, wins that division. I wouldn't sleep on Arizona after the down year they had last year. I think they're in for a bounce back. It's all about keeping Carson Palmer healthy there, who I don't love, by the way, as a quarterback. I think the Rams probably fall in line somewhere at third. Not going to happen overnight. You know, I would say the Rams are probably a team you circle for 2018, not 2017. But still a lot of answers there. Quarterback, head coach, a couple of young guys still trying to find their way in the National Football League. We'll talk some baseball. Mets, Yankees, Dodgers slumping, race getting interesting, both leagues in the wild card races. Dan Grassa in for Stephen A. till the top of the hour here on ESPN Radio.
Want to be a part of the show? Hit Stephen A. up weekdays from 1 to 3 Eastern at 866-729-3776.
Enjoying this podcast? Then you should check out all of ESPN Film's newly released 30 for 30 podcasts. From the producers of our award-winning documentary series, this is an amazing collection of sports stories you need to hear to believe. Speaking of amazing, Delta Airlines and the Fly Delta app make your travel experience amazingly easy with real-time bag tracking, e-boarding, and passport scanning during check-in. And don't forget to download 30 for 30 podcasts to fill your flight with stories that will keep you coming back for more.
Guess what? You're in the middle of the Stephen A. Smith Show podcast.
Damn it, I mean it! Until the top of the hour right here on ESPN Radio. Dan Grassa filling in for Stephen A. on this Labor Day. Turn things over at the top to a little baseball, Cubbies and Pirates out there at PNC Park. One of the best stadiums in all of Major League Baseball, if I may say so. 866-ESPN, 866-729-3776. You keep the tweets coming, too, at Dan Grassa, G-R-A-C-A. As far as the baseball's concerned, Yankees, you know what? Job well done for them this weekend, really. And, you know, it's case like 15 this year where you want to count the Yankees out after a dry spell, and they just surprise you and are able to rise up off the mat and continue to play winning baseball. That's what they did against the Red Sox. Taking 3 out of 4, it still gives them a pulse when it comes to maybe having an outside chance at winning the American League East. They're just 3 back in the loss column, so you feel good about that. They beat Chris Sale again, and boy, Chris Sale just can't seem to figure the Yankees out here in 2017. And Sale, maybe the wear and tear of a long season is maybe catching up to him a little bit because his last couple of starts have not been great. So Sale probably going to win the Cy Young Award still, but he might be showing a little bit of wear, as I said, from having to pitch so much as you get into September here. Big road trip. Yanks are starting off here. It's 9 games, Baltimore, Texas, and Tampa. Right now, not a good start down there at Camden Yards. They're in a 3-0 deficit, a couple of home runs. Tim Beckham led off the game for the O's. Chris Davis followed suit with a 2-run jack in the second inning. So 3-0 Baltimore, and Dylan Bundy still hasn't even allowed a hit yet so far, but we're still early in the third inning. And this is really the last big road trip of the season for the Yanks, because if they can somehow still be in good shape when they finish up these 9 games in these 3 cities, 14 of their last 17 games are going to be played in the Bronx. All right, and the only time they have to leave is a 3-game trip up to Toronto to take on the Jays, which I'm sure is not going to be easy. The Jays are going to want to disrupt one of their division rivals and potentially derail their chances of getting to October. But you got to like where the Yankees are at right now. You like the fact that Holiday has come back off the shelf after such a prolonged absence and has hit the ball, with some power like he did over the weekend with those couple of big shots against the Boston Red Sox. You like that. I know everybody was getting crazy last night about Aaron Judge's home run and, oh, my God, it traveled so far. Relax, okay? It was nice that he hit the home run, but come on. The Yankees were winning that game. They had already started to pull away before the Judge home run. That was just the icing on the cake. But they need Judge to get it going here. So far, he walked in his first at-bat this afternoon against Bundy and the Orioles. But I like where the Yankees are at here. And if you want to look wild card, they're 2 up on the Twins and 3.5 clear of both the Orioles and the Angels for just at least a playoff spot. Now, if they go out there and get swept this weekend by the Orioles, then I'd be a little bit more concerned and be a little bit worried. Texas, they still have a pulse. It's not great, but they still have a shot, so you know that they're going to be gunning for the Yankees when they head down to Arlington. And you could say the same thing about Tampa Bay, even though they've kind of slumped a little bit here and have fallen sub 500. So maybe the Rays are a little bit on the outside looking in when it comes to this postseason. You look at the flip side, though, and you look at what's happening out west with number 1, the National League wild card, where Arizona has basically punctuated the number 1 wild card spot in the NL. They're going to get that home game because Colorado got their absolute tails kicked this weekend at Coors Field by the D-backs, who went in there and swept them, and Arizona's won 10 in a row. They're playing fantastic baseball right now. Not that they're going to catch the Dodgers, but the Dodgers have actually lost 8 out of 9. You figure a slump of some kind had to happen for this team. They've been so good for so long, so maybe we'll pump the brakes on them getting 116 wins and setting records and all that stuff. They're at 92 now, so chances of them breaking any records, it's not going to happen for this Dodger team with the slump that they've just been on. And a fun series starting here tonight at Dodger Stadium, where you got the D-backs and you got the Dodgers in the in one that opens up at Dodger Stadium. 2 teams that are going to be part of the postseason mix, but going in opposite directions right now should be a lot of fun. And, you know, with Colorado slipping, Milwaukee is right there. Milwaukee's only a game back of the Rockies in the loss column. Maybe the Brewers, who've been getting some really good starting pitching of late, you know, maybe they can sneak in and grab that second wild card. Not crazy whatsoever. Lastly, on the Mets, you wish the best to David Wright, who cut short his rehab last week. He's going to have surgery on his shoulder to repair his rotator cuff in the hopes of him coming back and playing baseball. Let the Mets organization use that as a warning that David Wright cannot be part of their plans in 2018. I don't care what the surgeons do. I don't care if they put somebody else's arm on his, okay? They need to go out and address third base permanently. I don't know if it's Mike Moustakas or somebody else. You cannot allow David Wright to just hang around and still be almost an albatross to that third base position. Not fair. Cubs Pirates coming up. Thanks to Brad Edwards. Thanks to Nuno and Kat. Enjoy the rest of your Labor Day. Dan Graca saying so long on ESPN Radio.
That's just a sample of what you'll hear on the Stephen A. Smith Show. Weekdays at 1 p.m. Eastern on Sirius XM Channel 80 and the ESPN app.